What's up, guys? It's Danny from the Lacercast, and I am very tired. It is such an exciting and crazy time to be a horror fan right now. You can see it in my eyes. I have not had much sleep lately. I got home very late last night and recorded my review of Chucky Season 2, Episode 1. You can find that up on the Lacercast. Today, I went straight from work to day one of New York Comic Con, and I had an amazing end to my evening as I was part of the crowd. I sat front row at the world premiere of episode 1 of Mike Flanagan's latest Netflix show, I almost said The Haunting, The Midnight Club, based on the work of Christopher Pike. And this might come as a shock, considering that this is the Lacercast, and this entire channel was started so that Pete and Chris and I could wax poetic about Mike Flanagan's work. But I loved it, and I loved even more that after we got to see the world premiere episode, we got to have an absolutely amazing Q&A panel hosted by Perry Nemiroff of Collider, who did a phenomenal job. She had to juggle not just Mike Flanagan up on the stage, but 12 people in a 30-minute Q&A. And she did a fantastic job. Did not ever feel like she was letting people sit for too long. She managed to get everybody involved. She's just got such a great way of keeping it fresh and lively. And this panel, my goodness, it is a horror fan's dream panel. You have Mike Flanagan, one of the great film directors of the past decade. Forgetting about horror, just great directors. Obviously, if you're a horror fan, he's probably in the Mount Rushmore of modern horror directors. You can name your other three. I'm not going to bother with that. You also had his co-creator and co-writer of this series, Leah Fong, was up on the stage with him. His longtime friend and executive producer, Trevor Macy. And then you had a little somebody that horror fans might have heard of before. Nancy Thompson from the Nightmare on Elm Street films. You know, Heather Langenkamp, as Perry Nemiroff described her, horror royalty, front and center on the stage. And then you had this amazing crop of young, talented actors who play the, really the dying teens of the Midnight Club. And the cast includes Iman Benson, who is Ilanka. She's effectively the main character of this show. And then Igby Rigney, Anara Simone, Ruth Codd, Aya Furukawa, Chris Sumter, and Sorian Sapkota. Just an amazingly diverse and charming group of young, talented people. Some of these people you've seen before in other Flanagan work. I know Igby Rigney and I believe Anara Simone were both in Midnight Mass, a show that I have gone on record saying is such an important show on a personal level for me, coming out just a few months after my father passed, and the deep conversations and monologues that have to do with death and loss and what comes after were so incredibly helpful to me. I was so honored that I got to meet Kate Siegel tonight, and I actually got to tell her that her acting in those scenes really did help me, and she was just wonderful. It was just this was such an amazing experience, getting to be in that audience. they actually use the phrase the Flana-Fam to describe a lot of the actors that go along with Mike Flanagan's work. And I happen to think that maybe the fans are a part of that. This was a packed room, a huge room in the extension at the Javits Center for day one of Comic-Con. The room was packed, and you could tell the fans there, like, this means something to them. I was sitting next to a very nice woman who was wearing a Haunting of Bly Manor shirt, and I was like, wow, that's a great shirt. Where'd you get it? And she said, I made it. She screen printed it. And I was like, wow. And if she was selling them, I would have bought one right there. That's what this, that's what Mike Flanagan's work means to us. This first episode, let me get into this first episode. I'm a little bit frazzled between Comic-Con, between Pete and I covering the 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments on Shudder. Chucky Season 2 just started. Queer for Fear, the 4-part series, just started on Shudder. I'm going back to Comic-Con tomorrow. There's a Chucky panel tomorrow. I'm going back to Comic-Con on Saturday. I'm going back to Comic-Con on Sunday. I don't know when I'm going to sleep. So let me, when I can remember it, talk about just episode 1 of The Midnight Club, coming to Netflix. By the time you watch this video, it'll be Friday, October 7th, but I got to see it before you because I was at the world premiere at Comic-Con. For those of you who don't know, this series is based on the work of Christopher Pike, and you can get a great description of that in the book review that Pete and I did about Christopher Pike's The Midnight Club, where we also discuss the series and how Mike Flanagan and his crew are effectively taking the Midnight Club and then using that as a way to bring in at least 5 or 6 other Christopher Pike works. If you go on our channel right now, you can watch the whole 30-minute panel Q&A, and Mike Flanagan talks about how they effectively, him and Trevor Macy and Leah Fong talk about how they basically took 20 to 30 Christopher Pike stories and they kind of just took bits and pieces and made them into some of the B stories. The Midnight Club is such a fascinating idea to turn into a show because you effectively have a sort of scary setting, and then the characters within that setting are telling ghost stories. So it allows you to, as Mike Flanagan described in the Q&A, jump into several different genres. This first episode is actually amazing. If you watch the panel that I posted, you will see that this episode is now a Guinness World Record holder. It broke the record for most jump scares in one episode of television, which is so hilariously ironic, and Mike Flanagan knows this because he hates jump scares. And one of the things from the very beginning that we have always talked about, Pete and I and Chris when he was here, we always talked about how Mike Flanagan is the furthest horror director from a cheap cliche guy. You're not getting cheap jump scares with Mike Flanagan. You are not getting the cliche cat jumps out and scares somebody while the music crescendos and you're left sitting there going, oh, it's a cat? In fact, Chris introduced me to Mike Flanagan by telling me, you gotta watch this movie, Absentia. I found it on Netflix. It's got no cliches, no jump scares. You have to check it out. And it's funny hearing Mike Flanagan himself say how much he hates jump scares. Now they're a Guinness World Record holder, and it's all because of this episode. So we meet Alanka. Alanka is the main character of the book, and she is a teenager with her whole life in front of her until we find out that she has thyroid cancer. And it gets worse. Her foster father, played by Matt Beadle, who was also in The Haunting, I keep saying The Haunting, Midnight Mass, he is, he's distraught, and there's some wonderful, genuine human emotion moments in just the first 15 minutes of this episode, where eventually Alanka researches for herself a story about a girl with thyroid cancer who went to this young adult hospice up in Seattle, and somehow, some way, she was able to, she got cured. And so she starts to look into this hospice and convinces her father to take her there. And we get to this hospice, and we meet the doctor in charge, played by Nancy Thompson herself, Heather Langenkamp, who just is so wonderful in just a few minutes of screen time in this episode. And very quickly, Alanka meets the rest of the teens and the young adults in the hospice. There's Kevin, who has leukemia. We meet Spence, who has he takes her on a walk along, and we meet Amesh, and there's all of these wonderful characters, and we meet Anya, who's in a wheelchair, who has bone cancer, and very quickly we find out that these kids they sneak out of their rooms, and they meet in the library, in the basement library at midnight, and they tell ghost stories, or as one of them says, they make ghosts. And we get this amazing story from the actress Aya Furukawa, who, and this is where the Guinness World Records comes in, she tells this story about basically Spence, played by Chris Sumter, is now in the story, and he's walking home, and he's got this song in his head, and suddenly the street is totally empty, but he sees people staring at him, and then there's ghosts jumping out at him, and Mike Flanagan even said it, because it starts off very scary, and it very quickly goes full on into self-parody, to the point where we see Aya Furukawa on the table, climbing around the table, jumping in the other actors' faces to try to get jump scares. And then she goes back to her story, and it legit ends with a cat jumping out. It's brilliant. It's like the most deliciously brilliant dissection of the cheap jump scare that you could ever have. Charlotte and I just saw Smile. I did a review of it for this channel. You can watch my review. Charlotte was scared to death of that movie, and I thought it was very good, and I thought that movie effectively used jump scares better than many that I had seen. But this episode of The Midnight Club has effectively slaughtered the jump scare in the most amazingly ironic way. You could tell Mike Flanagan was having this like moment of glee where he's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna set the record for the most jump scares, but I'm also at the same time deconstructing the jump scare so that it will effectively be meaningless after this episode. We find out that the Midnight Club have also a pact where, knowing that they are probably all going to die, and probably soon, that whoever dies first will send some type of message from death, from the beyond, to let them know that, what it's like, and it's something that Alanka has to come to grips with. And then Alanka tells this great story about the girl who she read up on, who somehow ended up getting cured of thyroid cancer. And there's this just specter of death that comes and like sneaks around, and we don't see much, but just this brilliant idea of this, like, shadowy specter of death that is following us all, and for these kids more than most. I cannot wait until Comic-Con is over and I will have sufficient time to binge through the next 9 episodes of this show, because episode 1 was brilliant. I absolutely loved it. I think the acting is fantastic, and you also know that this show is going to wring those emotions out. You have young kids that are dying of terrible real-life diseases, and at the same time there's supernatural things going on. There's like real-world conversations to be had, and it's going to be a typical Mike Flanagan Express. It's going to be sad and scary. The guy next to me, so I had a woman on one side who was wearing an amazing Haunting of Bly Manor shirt, and then I had a guy on this side, and this guy, the whole episode, sat there like this, with like his hands pressing his ears so that he couldn't hear the jump scares. Amazing. This was like a 25 to 30 year old guy who was scared out of his mind, sitting in a dark room with a bunch of strangers, holding his ears to not be scared of the Mike Flanagan jump scares, world record holding jump scares. Pete and I are going to be reviewing the rest of this series. We haven't figured out exactly how we're going to do it, whether he's going to cover a couple episodes, I'm going to cover a couple episodes, whether we're going to do them together or separate, or one. We don't know yet, but we are going to get reviews up for episodes 2 through 9 of The Midnight Club on Netflix. By the time this video comes out, that show, all 10 episodes, will already be up on the channel, up on Netflix rather. If you are interested, like I said, the entire 30-plus minute panel discussion and Q&A led by Collider's Perry Nemiroff is up on the Lacercast now, including the presentation of the Guinness World Record, which is hilarious and amazing. Also, Pete and I, again, we just finished recording our episode 5 of Shudder's 101 Scariest Horror Movie Moments. That will be up before this, so you can check that out, watch that whole series. Before I go to Comic-Con tomorrow, I'll be watching Queer for Fear episode 2, and then in the afternoon, I will be sitting there and hopefully being able to record the Chucky panel, which includes Don Mancini, Jennifer Tilly, Zachary Arthur, etc., and that will go up on the channel as well. If you're a horror fan, there's never been a better time to subscribe to the Lacercast, because Pete and I are grinding out videos. Didn't even mention, he is going to be uploading an interview with horror writer Megan Stockton very soon, along on Pete's quest to interview every horror writer. He's just done so many great interviews this summer and fall, so another one coming very soon. So I need to go to bed. I'm exhausted, and I have a full day of Comic-Con tomorrow, so subscribe to the Lastercast, and I'll see you very soon.